I was folding clearance shirts at 3 o'clock in the morning on Black Friday when District Manager Brad Jenkins screamed across the sales floor, "Fold those shirts faster, wage slave!" His voice echoed through the empty store like a whip crack. My hands cramped from 16-hour shifts all week, my back ached from bending over display tables, and something inside me finally snapped. I stopped mid-fold, letting the navy polo drop to the floor. "I quit," I said quietly, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Brad's face turned purple with rage. "You can't quit. It's Black Friday." He panicked, realizing his skeleton crew was about to get even smaller. I smiled for the first time in months. "I can, because I own this building's lease, and I'm closing the store for renovation, right now." The stunned silence that followed my announcement felt like victory, but the real story began 3 months earlier at my grandmother Eleanor's funeral in July. I had expected maybe some family jewelry or her recipe collection, not the manila envelope the lawyer handed me containing deeds to 12 commercial properties across 3 states. Eleanor had built a quiet real estate empire over 40 years, and somehow I had inherited it all. Most people would have immediately quit their retail job and started collecting rent checks. But I couldn't stop thinking about something my grandmother once told me: "Katherine, money without wisdom is just fancy poverty." I decided to work undercover at various retail locations she owned, experiencing firsthand what kind of landlord I wanted to become. I created a fake backstory as a struggling college graduate needing work and applied at Fashion Forward, one of the busiest stores in Eleanor's portfolio. The hiring manager barely glanced at my application before handing me a polo shirt and scheduling me for 39 hours that first week. Not 40, I learned, because 40 would require benefits. My first day, I met Carmen Rodriguez, a single mother with twin 7-year-olds who worked 3 jobs to keep her apartment. She trained me on the register while explaining how she hadn't seen her kids awake in 2 weeks because of her schedule. "Brad makes us work until midnight, then open at 6 the next morning," she whispered, glancing toward the office. "But don't complain unless you want your hours cut." Arthur Wilson, 63, with diabetes and no health insurance, folded merchandise in the men's section. He had worked retail for 15 years, saving every penny for insulin and doctor visits. The company kept him at 38 hours weekly, 1 hour shy of qualifying for their health plan. "Used to stock overnight at a grocery store, too," he told me during our 5-minute break. "Had to quit when my blood sugar started acting up from the stress." Sophie Chen, 18, and brilliant, worked weekends to save for community college. She lived with her grandmother after aging out of foster care and dreamed of studying engineering. "If I can save $8,000 by next fall, I can start classes," she explained while restocking jewelry displays. "Only been saving for 2 years so far." These weren't just co-workers. They were good people trapped in a system designed to exploit their desperation. And Brad Jenkins was the eager enforcer of that system. Brad had perfected the art of psychological warfare disguised as management. He scheduled people for unpaid team meetings before their shifts started. He demanded employees arrive 15 minutes early for preparation time that never appeared on their paychecks. Bathroom breaks were timed and criticized. Sick days resulted in mysterious schedule reductions the following week. "The bathroom is for emergencies only," he announced during one of his mandatory staff meetings. "If you need more than 3 minutes, you're stealing company time." Carmen raised her hand to ask about medical conditions, and Brad's response was to reduce her weekend shifts by 4 hours the next week. No explanation given. I started documenting everything with my phone, keeping detailed records of every violation, every stolen minute, every cruel comment. I watched Arthur skip lunch breaks because Brad threatened to dock his pay for excessive break time. I saw Sophie cry in the stockroom after Brad humiliated her in front of customers for asking a pricing question. After 6 weeks of this treatment, I understood exactly what kind of landlord I needed to be. But first I had to expose what was happening to these wonderful people who deserved so much better than Brad Jenkins and his 39-hour slavery. The lease renewal meeting was scheduled for the week after Thanksgiving. Brad had no idea his landlord was folding clearance shirts 3 feet away from him, planning his downfall 1 stolen break at a time. By September, I had witnessed enough workplace abuse to fill a legal textbook, but what I discovered next turned my anger into a burning need for justice. It started when I volunteered to clean the offices after closing, hoping to find evidence of the systematic schedule manipulation I suspected. Brad's computer was still logged in when I arrived with my cleaning supplies. The payroll software glowed on his monitor, and what I saw made my blood freeze. He was actively editing our digital time cards, reducing recorded hours for every employee. Carmen's overtime from Saturday had disappeared. Arthur's full 8-hour shift on Tuesday showed as only 6 hours. Sophie's weekend work had been cut by 3 hours each day. I photographed everything, my hands shaking with rage. Brad wasn't just a terrible manager. He was a thief stealing wages from people who could least afford it. The next morning, I tracked down Jake Morrison, the former assistant manager who had been fired 2 months before I started. I found him working at a coffee shop across town, making half his previous wage. Jake was a decent guy with a business degree who had genuinely tried to help employees before Brad destroyed his career. "You want to know why I really got fired?" Jake asked during his break, stirring sugar into his coffee with tired hands. I caught Brad changing time cards and told him it was illegal. He said I was being dramatic and needed to focus on company profitability instead of being a bleeding heart. When I threatened to report him, he started documenting every tiny mistake I made until he had enough to fire me for cause. Jake revealed the full scope of Brad's scheme. The digital time card system allowed management to edit entries up to 72 hours after shifts ended. Brad would wait until Tuesday to alter the previous week's records, ensuring employees never noticed until their paychecks arrived. By then, most people assumed they had misremembered their hours or made a mistake. "He stole at least $300 from me over my last month," Jake calculated. "Multiply that by 12 employees over 6 months, and you're talking serious money." But who's going to believe minimum wage workers over a district manager? I spent the next week calculating the theft. Brad had stolen over $18,000 from our store's employees in 6 months. Carmen alone had lost nearly $2,000 in overtime pay money that could have covered her rent or her kids' school supplies. Arthur's missing wages could have paid for 3 months of insulin. Sophie's stolen hours represented an entire semester of community college tuition. Meanwhile, Brad's social media showed off his new Ford pickup truck, expensive watch, and vacation photos from Las Vegas. He was literally stealing Christmas presents from Sophie's foster grandmother and medicine money from Arthur while posting pictures of his luxury purchases. I began staying late to access Brad's office more frequently, photographing altered time cards and payroll records. I installed a tiny recording device under his desk and another in the break room where he made his most damaging statements about employees. Every conversation, every cruel comment, every admission of wage theft was documented. The more evidence I gathered, the more I realized this wasn't just about one store. During his phone calls with regional management, Brad often mentioned maintaining margins across all locations and implementing the same cost-saving measures we discussed for the other stores. This wage theft scheme was bigger than I had imagined. Carmen confided in me one evening as we restocked clearance racks together. "My kids asked why we can't afford new school shoes this year," she said quietly. "I work 60 hours a week between 3 jobs, but somehow I'm falling further behind every month. I used to make enough to save a little, but now—" She trailed off, embarrassed by her situation. Arthur had started rationing his insulin, taking smaller doses to make his supply last longer. "Doctor says I need the name brand kind, but that's $300 a month," he explained while organizing the sock display. "Generic works okay if I'm careful about what I eat. Just have to avoid stress, but that's hard in this place." Sophie had quietly given up on college for the upcoming spring semester. I thought I was getting close to my goal, but every week my paycheck seemed smaller, she told me while folding sweaters. Maybe college isn't meant for people like me. The emotional toll of watching these good people suffer while staying silent about my discovery was becoming unbearable. But I needed more evidence before I could act. If I was going to destroy Brad's life the way he was destroying theirs, I had to make sure he could never hurt another employee again. I started researching wage theft laws and discovered I could file complaints with both the Department of Labor and local law enforcement. But first, I wanted to understand exactly how extensive this criminal enterprise had become. In October, Regional Manager Susan Walsh made an unexpected visit to our store, and everything I thought I knew about the wage theft scheme expanded into something much more sinister. Susan was a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute power over vulnerable people. I was restocking jewelry displays when she arrived, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown timer. She barely acknowledged the employees heading straight to Brad's office for what I assumed was a routine inspection. But when I moved closer to dust, the nearby sunglasses rack their conversation revealed the true scope of the corruption. "The labor percentage is still too high," Susan's voice carried through the thin office walls. "Corporate wants to see 15% improvement in margins this quarter, which means we need to be more aggressive with our adjustments." Our adjustments. That was their euphemism for wage theft. "I'm already cutting everyone I can," Brad replied defensively. "If I go much further, people will start noticing." "Let them notice." Susan's laugh was cold and calculated. "What are they going to do, report us? These people are desperate for work. They'll accept whatever hours we give them rather than risk unemployment. Besides, we've got documentation showing performance issues for anyone who complains too much." I continued dusting my heart pounding as I realized I was witnessing a conspiracy that reached beyond our store. Susan wasn't just aware of the wage theft, she was orchestrating it across multiple locations. "How are the other stores handling the adjustments?" Brad asked. "Beautifully. The Riverside location saved $43,000 last quarter through strategic hour management. The downtown store eliminated all overtime payments by restructuring break schedules, and the mall location increased productivity 15% by implementing competitive pressure between employees." Susan detailed a systematic operation that had stolen wages from hundreds of workers across 8 stores throughout the district. She collected 20% of all savings as a performance bonus, turning employee exploitation into personal profit. I watched through the glass partition as Susan pulled out a tablet and showed Brad spreadsheets documenting the theft. Each store had monthly targets for wage reduction, tracked like sales goals. Employees were categorized as compliant, monitoring required, or termination recommended, based on their willingness to accept the abuse without complaint. "The key is maintaining plausible deniability," Susan explained. "Never put the hour adjustments in writing. Always have a performance-related excuse ready for any reductions. And remember, these people chose to work retail. They're grateful to have jobs at all." Carmen appeared on their termination list simply because she had asked about her missing overtime pay. Arthur was marked for monitoring because he had requested a schedule that accommodated his medical appointments. Sophie was categorized as compliant because she hadn't complained about her shortened shifts, unaware that complaining was even an option. Susan's lecture continued with increasing cruelty. "These workers need to understand that employment is a privilege, not a right. When they complain about hours or wages, they're showing ingratitude for the opportunity we've provided them. Our job is to correct that attitude through appropriate consequences." During Susan's visit, Carmen approached her about the overtime pay discrepancy that had been bothering her for weeks. "Excuse me, Mrs. Walsh. I think there might be a mistake with my paycheck. I worked 12 hours of overtime last month, but it's not showing up correctly." Susan's response was swift and humiliating. "Carmen, is it? I'm disappointed to hear you're questioning our payroll accuracy. That suggests a lack of trust in management, which is concerning. Maybe you'd be happier working somewhere else if you can't appreciate the opportunity you have here." Carmen's face flushed with embarrassment as other employees and customers witnessed the public shaming. "I just wanted to make sure the hours were right," she said quietly. "The hours are exactly what they should be," Susan replied dismissively. "Perhaps you should focus more on your performance and less on micromanaging your paycheck. Brad, please note this conversation in Carmen's file for future reference." I watched my friend's shoulders slump in defeat, knowing she couldn't risk pushing further without losing her job entirely. She had twin boys depending on her income, no savings to fall back on, and no leverage against corporate intimidation. After Susan left, I spent my break calculating the true scope of their criminal enterprise. 8 stores, roughly 15 employees per location, wage theft averaging $200 per employee monthly. Susan and Brad were stealing over $24,000 every month from workers who were living paycheck to paycheck. The money they stole wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was Carmen's children's Christmas presents, Arthur's insulin, Sophie's education, and the dignity of dozens of hardworking people who deserved better than corporate predators in expensive suits. I realized I needed federal investigators, not just local authorities. This was organized crime disguised as retail management, and it required a response that matched the scale of their operation. That night I researched federal agencies that handled wage theft and corporate fraud. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division seemed like the right place to start. But first, I needed even more evidence to ensure Brad and Susan faced serious consequences for what they were doing to my friends. The lease renewal meeting was 6 weeks away. I had 6 weeks to build an airtight case that would destroy their criminal enterprise and restore the stolen wages to every employee they had victimized. In early November, I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division with a detailed report of everything I had documented. Agent Maria Rodriguez, a sharp investigator with 15 years of experience in corporate fraud cases, was assigned to review my evidence. When she called me back 3 days later, her enthusiasm told me I had built a stronger case than even I realized. "Katherine, this is some of the most thorough documentation I've seen from a civilian witness," Agent Rodriguez said during our first phone call. "You've essentially done 90% of our investigative work already. We're going to move forward with a full federal investigation." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 20 minutes from the store. Agent Rodriguez was a professional woman in her 40s who immediately understood the emotional weight of what I had witnessed. "You've been carrying this burden for months while watching your coworkers get robbed every day," she said after reviewing my evidence. "That takes incredible strength and moral courage." The FBI had been tracking similar wage theft operations across the region, but most cases lacked the detailed evidence needed for prosecution. Corporate criminals like Brad and Susan typically covered their tracks too well for effective enforcement. My recordings and photographs provided the missing pieces for multiple ongoing investigations. "We're going to set up federal surveillance of your store and coordinate with other field offices investigating the remaining locations," Agent Rodriguez explained. "This appears to be part of a larger pattern involving the parent company's regional management structure." Over the following 2 weeks, I worked as an unofficial undercover agent for the FBI. They provided me with more sophisticated recording equipment that could capture conversations from greater distances. My phone was equipped with software that automatically uploaded photographs and audio files to secure federal servers. The deeper surveillance revealed even more disturbing information. Brad kept a second set of books hidden in his car, documenting the actual hours worked by employees versus the falsified records submitted to corporate headquarters. This dual record system allowed him to track his theft while maintaining plausible deniability about payroll errors. I discovered Brad was also underreporting actual employee hours to the IRS, avoiding proper payroll tax payments on the stolen wages. The federal government was being defrauded, along with the workers adding tax evasion to the growing list of charges. Susan's visits to other stores revealed the systematic nature of their operation. During recorded phone calls, she discussed implementing the same cost-saving measures at a grocery store chain and a customer service call center owned by the parent company. Hundreds of workers across multiple industries were being victimized by the same scheme. The emotional toll on my coworkers became increasingly difficult to witness in silence. Arthur collapsed during his shift on a particularly busy Saturday, his blood sugar crashing after working 8 hours without a proper meal break. Brad's response was to dock his pay for leaving early and suggest he find work better suited to his health limitations. Sophie broke down crying in the stockroom after Brad humiliated her in front of a group of teenage customers. She had asked about a pricing discrepancy on a clearance item, and Brad accused her of being too stupid for retail, while the customers watched in uncomfortable silence. The humiliation was devastating for an 18-year-old who had already faced rejection and abandonment throughout her childhood in foster care. Carmen received notice that her electricity would be shut off in 10 days due to unpaid bills. The money Brad had stolen from her overtime pay was exactly what she needed to keep the power on for her children. She applied for emergency assistance from local charities, humiliated by having to beg for help while working 60 hours per week. "I don't understand what's happening," Carmen confided in me during a brief break. "I used to be able to pay my bills and even save a little money. Now I'm working more hours but falling further behind every month. Maybe I'm just bad with money." The self-blame in her voice broke my heart. Brad had convinced his victims that their financial struggles were personal failures rather than the result of his systematic theft. The psychological manipulation was almost as cruel as the wage theft itself. Agent Rodriguez and her team were building cases for multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The penalties could include decades in federal prison and millions in restitution payments. But the investigation needed to continue until they had evidence from all affected locations. "We're coordinating raids across 8 stores simultaneously," Agent Rodriguez explained during one of our meetings. If we move too early on your location, the other sites will destroy evidence before we can gather it. Can you maintain your cover for another few weeks? I agreed to continue working while watching my friends suffer, knowing that the eventual justice would be worth the temporary pain. But as Black Friday approached, Brad announced plans that forced us to accelerate our timeline. During a management conference call, I secretly recorded Brad discussed his post-holiday workforce reduction strategy. He planned to fire half the staff immediately after Black Friday to cut costs for the holiday quarter, ensuring they wouldn't receive Christmas bonuses or unemployment benefits. The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. He was targeting families just before Christmas, stealing their holiday pay after months of wage theft. Carmen's children would have no presents under their tree. Arthur would lose his health insurance just as winter stress threatened his diabetes management. Sophie would see her college dreams permanently destroyed. I called Agent Rodriguez that night. "We need to move sooner," I told her. "Brad's planning mass terminations right after Black Friday. If we wait much longer, these people will lose everything." "All right," she agreed. "Let's coordinate the raids for Black Friday morning. The timing will actually work in our favor with all the customers and media attention. When this story breaks, it's going to be national news." I had waited 3 months for this moment. Justice was finally coming for Brad Jenkins and Susan Walsh, and it was going to arrive with federal badges and television cameras on the biggest shopping day of the year. Thanksgiving week brought an escalation of abuse that made me question how much longer I could maintain my undercover role without exploding. Brad's demands became impossible as he prepared for Black Friday sales while deliberately understaffing the store to maximize his stolen wage profits. He scheduled Carmen for 14 straight days without a day off, including doubles on Tuesday and Wednesday before Thanksgiving. When she requested Thursday off to cook dinner for her children, Brad's response was swift and cruel. "Thanksgiving is for people who can afford to be grateful," he said loudly enough for customers to hear. "Maybe if you were more productive, you wouldn't need the hours so badly." Arthur was required to work overnight shifts, setting up Black Friday displays, despite his doctor's warnings about irregular sleep affecting his blood sugar. When he mentioned his medical concerns, Brad suggested he find a job that doesn't require physical effort, and documented the conversation as employee-resistant to assigned duties. Sophie was scheduled for 45 hours that week, then informed at the last minute that Friday would be unpaid training time since she was learning new promotional procedures. The 5 hours of stolen wages represented her grocery money for the following week. I listened to Brad's conference call with regional management on Tuesday evening, recording every word as he detailed his post-Black Friday termination strategy. The conversation revealed a level of calculated cruelty that surpassed even my worst expectations. "Phase 1 begins Saturday morning," Brad explained to Susan and other district managers. "I'll terminate the bottom performers for cause effective immediately. No severance, no unemployment eligibility, and timing it right after the holiday rush means they can't claim it's retaliatory." Susan's voice crackled through the speakerphone with approval. "Beautiful timing. Who's on your termination list?" Brad rattled off names like he was ordering lunch. Carmen Rodriguez for questioning payroll accuracy, Arthur Wilson for medical attendance issues, Sophie Chen for requesting schedule accommodations, plus Jake's replacement, and anybody who's complained about hours in the past 6 months. "That eliminates your most expensive employees right before Christmas bonus calculations," Susan noted approvingly. "The cost savings will look excellent in quarterly reports. Corporate will be impressed with your workforce management." They discussed each termination with businesslike efficiency, planning to destroy families' Christmas celebrations while congratulating themselves on improved profit margins. Carmen's twins would wake up on Christmas morning with no presents because their mother dared to ask about her missing overtime pay. Arthur would lose his health insurance precisely when winter stress threatened his diabetes management. Sophie would see her college dreams permanently shattered because she requested shifts that allowed time for studying. The conversation continued with discussions about documentation strategies to prevent successful unemployment claims. They had perfected a system of creating fake performance issues in employee files providing legal cover for retaliatory terminations. Anyone who complained about wage theft would be fired for attendance problems or productivity concerns that were retroactively documented. "The key is never admitting the real reason," Brad explained. "We terminate for unrelated performance issues and they can't prove retaliation. Most of these people can't afford lawyers anyway. I photographed the termination lists Brad printed after the call, ensuring the FBI had documented proof of the planned retaliations. Agent Rodriguez confirmed that federal prosecutors could file additional charges for interfering with workers' rights to report wage violations. Wednesday night, I made final preparations for the confrontation that would end Brad's criminal enterprise. Agent Rodriguez positioned surveillance teams throughout the shopping center disguised as early Black Friday customers. Federal agents would be hidden inside the store ready to emerge when Brad revealed his true character to the waiting crowd. I spent Wednesday evening creating evidence packages for immediate distribution to affected employees. Each folder contained copies of their real-time records, calculations of stolen wages, and contact information for the federal investigators handling their cases. Every person Brad had robbed would receive full documentation of the theft and assistance recovering their money. The FBI had coordinated with local news stations to ensure media coverage of the arrests. When Brad's story broke, it would serve as a warning to other employers considering similar schemes while encouraging more victims to come forward. I also prepared legal paperwork for immediate lease termination, giving Brad exactly 1 hour to remove his belongings before losing access to the building. The timing would prevent him from destroying additional evidence while ensuring maximum public exposure of his crimes. That night, I called my co-workers to verify they would be working the early Black Friday shift. Each conversation broke my heart as they expressed exhaustion and anxiety about the approaching retail nightmare, unaware that their suffering would end in just a few hours. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Carmen admitted during our call. "The kids are asking why Mommy is always tired and sad. I'm working 3 jobs, but we're still falling behind on bills. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Tomorrow will be different." I promised her, unable to explain why. "Just trust me that things are going to get better." As I tried to sleep that night, I thought about my grandmother Eleanor and what she would say about using her real estate empire to fight corporate criminals. She had always believed that wealth without purpose was just decorated poverty. Tomorrow, her legacy would help restore dignity to workers who deserved so much better than Brad Jenkins and his wage theft operation. Black Friday would bring justice, federal arrests, and the beginning of real change for every employee who had suffered under Brad's systematic cruelty. The waiting was almost over. Black Friday morning arrived with hundreds of eager customers lined up outside our store by 2:30 a.m., their breath visible in the November cold as they clutched shopping lists and caffeine-fueled determination. Inside, Brad paced the sales floor like a general preparing for battle, barking orders at employees who had already worked 16-hour days throughout the week. The store buzzed with frantic energy as we prepared for the 3 a.m. opening. Arthur arranged clearance displays while fighting obvious fatigue from his overnight blood sugar struggles. Carmen restocked jewelry while worrying about her children who were staying with neighbors because she couldn't afford reliable childcare. Sophie folded promotional T-shirts while calculating whether her Black Friday wages would cover next week's groceries. Federal agents were positioned throughout the crowd outside, disguised as typical early morning shoppers, with their phones ready to record whatever happened next. Agent Rodriguez had briefed them on my signal, which would be my dramatic revelation about owning the building's lease. At exactly 3 a.m., Brad unlocked the doors and customers flooded in like a retail tsunami. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming as people rushed toward advertised deals, while Brad screamed directions at employees who could barely keep up with the demand. For 20 minutes, I played my part perfectly, folding clearance shirts, while Brad's abuse reached new heights. The presence of customers seemed to embolden him, as if having witnesses to his power gave him additional satisfaction. "Faster!" he screamed at Carmen as she struggled to ring up a complicated return while 3 more customers waited impatiently. "If you can't handle simple retail tasks, maybe you should look for easier work." "Move it!" he yelled at Arthur, who was restocking display racks as quickly as his aging hands allowed. "Customers are waiting and time is money. Act like you want this job." Then he turned his attention to me, his voice carrying across the busy sales floor like a whip crack. "Fold those shirts faster, wage slave." The words echoed through the store as customers turned to witness his public humiliation of an employee. The moment had arrived. 3 months of planning, weeks of federal investigation, and countless hours of documented abuse all led to this single moment of truth. I stopped folding mid-motion, letting the navy polo shirt drop to the floor. The simple act of defiance felt like breaking chains that had held me captive for months. I quit, I said clearly, my voice carrying enough to be heard by nearby customers who were already pointing their phones in our direction. Brad's face transformed through several shades of red as panic replaced his usual arrogance. "You can't quit, it's Black Friday!" he shouted suddenly, realizing that his skeleton crew was about to become even more impossibly understaffed. I smiled with the genuine joy of someone who had waited months for this exact moment. "I can quit, because I own this building's lease, and I'm closing the store for renovation, right now." The words hit Brad like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed silently as he processed what I had just revealed. Customers stopped shopping to watch the unfolding drama, their phones capturing every moment of his public humiliation. "You're lying!" Brad stammered, his usual commanding presence cracking under the weight of sudden uncertainty. "You're just a retail worker. You don't own anything." "Katherine Eleanor Richardson," I said clearly for the benefit of the recording phones. "Granddaughter of Eleanor Richardson, who owned this building for 23 years. I inherited the property in July, and I've spent 3 months working here undercover to document your systematic wage theft and employee abuse." The color drained from Brad's face as he realized the implications. Every cruel comment, every stolen hour, every act of workplace terrorism had been witnessed and recorded by his landlord. Customers pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Their phones created a forest of recording devices capturing every word, every expression, every moment of Brad's dawning horror. "This store is officially closed for labor law violations," I announced to the crowd. "Every employee here has been the victim of systematic wage theft. Federal investigators are already building criminal cases against management." Brad's panic transformed into desperate rage. He lunged toward me with his hand raised, clearly intending to grab or strike me in front of dozens of witnesses. "You can't do this to me," he screamed. "I'll sue you for everything you're worth." His threatening gesture triggered the federal response. Agent Rodriguez and her team emerged from their hiding spots throughout the store, displaying badges and moving with practiced efficiency. "FBI, stop moving," Agent Rodriguez commanded as 2 agents immediately restrained Brad before he could reach me. "You're under arrest for wage theft, tax fraud, and conspiracy to violate workers' rights." The crowd gasped and cheered as Brad was handcuffed in front of rolling phone cameras. His arrogance evaporated completely as federal agents read him his rights while customers recorded every word for social media. Simultaneously, agents arrested Susan Walsh at the regional headquarters across town. The coordinated raids at all 8 stores were being broadcast live on local news as the story spread across social media platforms. "Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the crowd of customers and employees, many of whom were crying with relief and shock. "This store and 7 others have been stealing wages from hardworking employees for over 6 months. Every worker you see here tonight has lost hundreds or thousands of dollars in stolen overtime and reduced hours." Carmen collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the realization that her financial struggles weren't her fault. Arthur leaned against a display rack, processing the fact that his missing wages could have prevented his recent health crisis. Sophie stared in amazement, understanding that her college dreams weren't dead after all. "All affected employees will receive full back pay plus damages within 72 hours, I continued. "Federal investigators have recovered every stolen dollar, and these managers will face serious federal prison time." The crowd erupted in applause as news crews arrived to cover the breaking story. Brad's arrest on charges of stealing Christmas money from retail workers was already trending on social media platforms across the country. Local news anchors interviewed customers who had witnessed the confrontation, creating instant public support for the wronged employees. The story was spreading faster than wildfire, turning our small retail store into the center of a national conversation about worker exploitation. As Brad was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. "You ruined my life!" he snarled through the crowd noise. "No," I replied calmly, ensuring the nearby cameras caught my response. "You ruined your own life when you decided to steal from people who trusted you. I just made sure there were consequences." The greatest satisfaction wasn't watching Brad's arrest, though that was deeply fulfilling. It was seeing Carmen's face when she realized her children would have Christmas presents after all. It was watching Arthur understand that he could afford his medication and proper medical care. It was seeing Sophie's tears of joy as her college dreams came back to life. Justice had arrived on Black Friday morning, and it was wearing FBI badges and social media documentation that would ensure this story reached every worker facing similar exploitation across the country. 2 weeks after Black Friday, the scales of justice were working overtime to restore what Brad and Susan had stolen from so many hardworking people. Federal prosecutors filed charges for wire fraud, tax evasion conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Both defendants accepted plea agreements rather than face decades in federal prison, admitting guilt to all charges in exchange for reduced sentences. The financial recovery exceeded even my optimistic expectations. Federal investigators had traced the full scope of the wage theft operation across 8 stores, documenting the theft of $327,000 from over 100 employees during the previous 18 months. Every stolen dollar was recovered, plus additional damages and penalty payments that brought the total restitution to nearly $500,000. Carmen received $4,300 in back pay, plus damages enough to catch up on all her bills, buy Christmas presents for her twins, and establish an emergency savings fund for the first time in years. When she opened the federal restitution check, she cried with relief and called her children to tell them Mommy wouldn't be working 3 jobs anymore. Arthur's restitution check covered 18 months of premium insulin plus comprehensive medical care he had been postponing due to cost. His doctor was amazed by the improvement in his blood sugar control once financial stress was eliminated from his daily life. Sophie received enough stolen wages to cover her first 2 years of community college tuition, books, and living expenses. She enrolled in engineering courses for the spring semester, finally able to pursue the education she had dreamed about throughout her difficult childhood in foster care. But the money was only part of the transformation I wanted to create. 3 days after the arrests, I called a meeting with all affected employees to propose something unprecedented in American retail, converting our store into a worker-owned cooperative. You've all proven your dedication through months of abuse and exploitation, I told the gathered group of current and former employees. Now I want to offer you something better than traditional employment. I want to offer you ownership. The cooperative structure would give each participating employee ownership shares based on their tenure and the amount of wages that had been stolen from them. Carmen, Arthur, Sophie, and 6 other workers would become business partners, sharing both the work and the profits of retail success. My role would be as the building owner, providing the space initial inventory investment and business development support. But the day-to-day operations would be controlled by the employees themselves, ensuring that no one could ever again steal their dignity or their wages. You mean we would be our own bosses? Sophie asked, her voice filled with wonder at the possibility. You mean no more 39-hour schedules to avoid benefits? Arthur added, calculating the difference quality healthcare would make to his life. You mean when we work overtime, we actually get paid for it? Carmen said with a laugh that held months of suppressed frustration. The legal paperwork took 6 weeks to complete, but by mid-January we were ready for our grand reopening as Cooperative Corner, a worker-owned retail store that prioritized employee welfare alongside customer service and business profitability. Carmen was elected general manager by unanimous vote, her natural leadership skills finally recognized and rewarded. Arthur became customer service supervisor, his patience and kindness creating genuine connections with shoppers who appreciated authentic care. Sophie managed our social media presence, her intelligence and creativity attracting younger customers while telling our story of worker empowerment. The community response exceeded our wildest expectations. Customers actively sought us out specifically to support worker ownership, turning our store into a symbol of what retail could become when employees were treated as partners rather than disposable resources. Monthly profits were shared equally among all worker owners, creating financial security none of them had experienced in traditional retail employment. Brad was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison plus full restitution payments. The judge noted that his crime was particularly heinous because it targeted vulnerable workers who depended on their wages for basic survival. Susan received 3 years for conspiracy and tax fraud, with additional penalties for her role in orchestrating the multi-location scheme. The legal precedent established by their prosecution encouraged other workers to report similar wage theft operations. Within 6 months, federal investigators had opened cases against 12 other retail chains using comparable exploitation methods. I decided to apply the cooperative model to my other inherited properties, working with existing tenants to establish worker-owned businesses wherever employees expressed interest. Eleanor's real estate empire became a launching pad for worker empowerment across 3 states. The ripple effects continued expanding throughout the first year. Local news coverage inspired other retail workers to organize for better treatment, leading to successful unionization efforts at major chain stores. Business schools began teaching our cooperative model as an alternative to traditional retail employment structures. Most importantly, my former coworkers were thriving in ways that would have been impossible under traditional retail exploitation. Carmen's children saw their mother happy and energetic for the first time in years. Arthur's health stabilized with proper medical care and reduced stress. Sophie excelled in her engineering courses while building valuable business experience through her ownership role. During our first anniversary celebration, I reflected on my grandmother Eleanor's wisdom about money without purpose being just fancy poverty. Her real estate inheritance had given me wealth, but using it to fight systematic worker exploitation had given me genuine purpose. The deepest lesson from this experience was understanding that individual success means nothing if we ignore systematic injustice around us. Everyone deserves dignity in their work, fair compensation for their labor, and respect for their humanity. When we use our resources and privileges to protect vulnerable people from exploitation, we create ripple effects that transform communities far beyond our immediate actions. Carmen gave a speech at our anniversary party that captured the spirit of what we had built together. "A year ago, I was working 3 jobs and couldn't afford my kids' school supplies," she said to the gathered customers and worker owners. "Today, I own a business. My children are proud of their mom's work, and I'm helping other people achieve their dreams too." That's what happens when people decide to treat workers like human beings instead of disposable profits. As I watched our worker owners laugh and celebrate their success, I knew my grandmother would be proud of how her legacy was being used to fight the kind of corporate cruelty that treats human beings like expendable resources. Real change happens when we stop accepting systematic injustice as inevitable and start using whatever power we have to protect people who deserve better. Sometimes it takes working undercover for 3 months to gather evidence. Sometimes it takes federal investigators and criminal prosecutions. But most importantly, it takes the courage to stand up for what's right even when staying quiet would be easier. The best part of this journey wasn't destroying Brad's criminal enterprise, though that justice felt deeply satisfying. The best part was seeing Carmen's confidence bloom as she discovered her natural leadership abilities, watching Arthur's health improve with proper medical care, and celebrating Sophie's academic success as she pursued her engineering dreams. That's what happens when we choose to fight for each other instead of just ourselves. Everyone wins except the people who were profiting from cruelty in the first place. I'd love to hear about your experiences with workplace fairness. Have you ever witnessed systematic exploitation of employees in your workplace or community? What do you think it takes to create lasting change when powerful people abuse vulnerable workers? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe workers deserve dignity and fair treatment. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about people fighting back against injustice, and please share this story with anyone who needs to know that standing up to workplace bullies is possible and powerful. Together, we can create workplaces where everyone is treated with the respect and fairness they deserve. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation and justice. May you always have the courage to stand up for what's right, the wisdom to use your privileges to protect others, and the satisfaction of knowing that real change is possible when good people refuse to accept systematic cruelty. Until next time, keep fighting for a world where everyone's work is valued and everyone's humanity is respected.